We all love planning that perfect getaway, don't we? That escape from the everyday. But what if there's a hidden, ethical landmine buried under that dream vacation? Today, we're diving headfirst into the really complex world where tourism and human rights crash into each other. You probably think of a vacation as a luxury, a nice to have, but what if it's actually framed as a fundamental right? The World Tourism Organization does exactly that. They talk about the rights to rest and leisure and the freedom to travel. It's seen as an essential break. But, this is where things start to get really complicated. Because what happens when your right to that perfect beach holiday bumps right up against someone else's right to their home, their land, their entire way of life? And that right there is the huge conflict we're going to unpack. So yeah, this sets up a massive clash of rights. It's a direct face-off between the visitor and the host community. And look, this is not just some philosophical debate. It's happening for real. Imagine this. A giant, shiny new resort gets built. It promises jobs, money, all the good stuff for the region. But that promise, it often comes at a devastating price. Small communities, often indigenous ones, can be completely pushed out to make way for it. Their homes, their livelihoods, just gone. All for someone else's vacation. And when you lay it all out like this, the conflict is just stark. On one side, you have the tourists' right to take a break. On the other, you have a community's fundamental right to their homes, their culture, their actual survival. It really forces you to ask a tough question. Should one person's leisure time ever outweigh another's entire existence? But this whole situation, it actually cracks open an even deeper problem. It makes us question the very idea of a universal standard for human rights. I mean, are they really universal for everyone everywhere? We love the idea that human rights are this one global standard that applies to everyone equally. But is that how it actually works in practice? Does everyone around the world even agree on what the most important rights are? Well, as it turns out, the answer is not really. Just look at how different priorities emerge depending on history and context. So, developed Western nations, they've historically put a huge emphasis on individual civil and political rights. Then you have former socialist states, which often focused way more on collective economic and social rights. And for a lot of developing nations, the number one priority has been the right to self-determination and development for the whole community. These are not small differences. We're talking about fundamentally different ways of looking at the world. And this is the really critical takeaway. Some critics argue that this whole push for a single global set of human rights is just the West imposing its own moral code on other cultures. From this angle, it's seen as a kind of colonialist interventionism, basically saying Western values are the default best and pushing other moral traditions to the side. Okay, so with this ridiculously complex landscape, how does the tourism industry even try to deal with it? Well, they've created ethical codes, basically a rulebook to navigate these problems. But the real question is, do they actually do anything? You've got things like the World Tourism Organization's Global Code of Ethics. It's a super detailed document. It's full of references to human rights, principles for responsible tourism. I mean, on paper, it sounds like the perfect solution, right? But here's the reality check. These codes, they're usually voluntary. They're often nothing more than aspirational documents, like a wish list of best practices. There are hardly ever any serious penalties for ignoring them, and they are almost never legally binding. So they look fantastic, but they often have zero teeth to actually enforce any real change. Which all leads to a much more cynical and maybe more realistic question. What if these ethical codes aren't really about morality at all? What if they're just about business strategy? In fact, there's a much harder-edged view of capitalism that suggests the whole idea of ethics in business is completely misunderstood by most of us. So, way back in 1968, a writer named Albert Carr put forth this really provocative argument. Business plays by its own set of rules, completely separate from the ethics of everyday society. He basically said business isn't about being moral, it's a game, and it's played like poker. Think about that for a second. In poker, bluffing isn't just allowed, it's a core part of the strategy. If you take that view, the only real goal of a business is to win, which means making a profit. Adopting an ethics code then becomes a strategic bluff, a clever move to improve your image, avoid bad press, and ultimately boost sales. Any actual principles take a back seat to the bottom line. So here's the ultimate irony. When companies are encouraged to adopt these ethical codes, the pitch they hear isn't, do this because it's the right thing to do. Nope, it's do this because it's good for business. It's a pragmatic argument that turns ethics into just another tool for making money instead of a guiding principle. So, we're left with this massive puzzle. We've seen rights clash, we've seen how universal standards might not be so universal, and we've seen how ethics can be used as just another business strategy. Which means when you go to book your next trip, the final big question isn't just for governments or corporations, it lands right on you. What rights are you willing to put on the table for that perfect vacation?